is a story from the Bible that illustrates for us the power of pessimism and challenges us, hopefully, to embrace the opportunity of optimism instead. I want you to open your Bibles to Numbers chapter 13. No doubt it's a story you're familiar with. The book of Numbers is a travel journal. Exodus has just taken place. They've gone out from the land of Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea. They're now free. They have gone to Mount Sinai and they've entered into a covenant with God to be God's people. And He's given them not just the Ten Commandments and not just the other civil and social laws that they're to obey, the moral, the religious. They've got the blueprint for the tabernacle that they're to construct and all of that. And then we get the book of Leviticus, which is basically a handbook for the priesthood, to tell them this is how to train the people to purify themselves, to be made holy, so that you can come before me and worship. So all of that is behind us, and now we kind of jump back into what you would call the narrative of the story. Exodus, at the very end of Exodus is really, in Leviticus for that matter too, predominantly it's a blueprint type of literature. It's telling them this is what you do, this is how you do it, this is when you do it. It's just very meticulous, very detailed. It's almost like reading an instruction manual that comes with something that you buy. Numbers is not like that though. Numbers goes back to the narrative, meaning storytelling. We're gonna look at stories from the lives of the people of Israel. Now where we're coming in now has them as they actually make their way close to the promised land. This morning we talked an awful lot about all of those promises that God made going way back to Genesis 12 with Abram when He called him out of Ur of the Chaldees and made these great promises. And God has been checking off those promises. They are now a great nation, just like He promised. There is the land that He has promised. And when Numbers chapter 13 begins, Moses is going to send out a delegation of spies to see if the land is everything they've been told that it was. There are 12 spies that go down, one from each of the 12 tribes represented. And so we begin in Numbers chapter 13 and verse 1. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them." So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of the men who were the heads of the people of Israel. And then he begins to tell us who those people are. So they go out and they say, there's a great little VBS song. 12 little spies went down to Canaan. 10 saw bad, 2 saw good. What did they see when they got to Canaan? 10 saw bad, 2 saw good. And they talk about all the things that they sing, and they talk about the giants that they see and the walled cities that they see, and they come back and they give a report of everything that they've encountered. But what we want to draw from this tonight, I know you know the story, but what we're going to focus on as it pertains to how do we benefit from this at this church? What do we learn from this? What do we take from this? It's not important just to know the story. It's important to know the story, but it's not just important to know the story. It's important to know the story and to know the story's applications in 2019 in Lake City, Florida. That's what's really important. Understand the story, understand the ramifications for God's people here, because just like the ones that are camped out sending the spies, we're God's people. We're God's people, and just like those that were camped out, there are things that God has called us to do. There are things that God has put before us. Some are challenges, some are opportunities, some are just acts of obedience, and God's put those things before us, and then God puts them before us, and then He stands back and He watches, are you going to now do what I've told you to do? Are you going to trust me? Especially when those obstacles come, and they will come, they always come. What will you do in those moments? Will you revert back to old ways? Now for the Israelites, that was the Egyptian mindset. Oh, we should have stayed in Egypt. Oh, I wish we would have died in Egypt. Oh, wasn't life so good in Egypt? For us, it might be, this Christian thing has just not quite turned out like I thought it was going to be. I thought when I became a Christian that everything was going to be great, there's not going to be any problems, there's not going to be any obstacles. I thought when I became a part of God's family, I'm becoming a part of this wonderful, amazing group of people where everybody loves each other and serves each other and everybody's nice to each other. And then we start having problems dealing with each other. And we start to go, no, wait a minute. This is not what the instruction package said. This is not what the advertisement had. And so we have to wrestle with these things. And so hopefully we can look at how they dealt with these circumstances, learn lessons maybe that we need to imitate, or learn lessons that we may need to distance ourselves as far as possible from how they handled it. All right, let's look at this. The power of pessimism and the opportunities for optimism. First thing I want you to notice is that this land is fruitful. There's no disputing that. All 12, they come back. They're in complete agreement. This is a very fruitful, abundant land. This is we've talked before about how a lot of the language from the Garden of Eden actually is in this story describing the land of Canaan. Verse number 23 says, they came back to the cluster valley, and they cut down from there a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two of them. I'll be honest with you, the biggest cluster of grapes I've ever seen was probably about yay big. I did not need a second person to help me tote them. I don't know what these look like. I don't know what grapes were like in Canaan, but here's what I do know. A single cluster was so fruitful, so bountiful, that they strung it up on a pole and two men toted it back. That tells me it wasn't just fruitful, it was very fruitful. Very lush, very abundant, overwhelming. And they carried it between the two. But it's not just grapes, they also brought back some pomegranates and they brought back some figs. So this land is fruitful. Nobody's disputing. This is not like the wilderness. Remember the problem in the wilderness? They get out of the wilderness and go, whoo, we're free and we're hungry. There ain't no McDonald's around here. There's nowhere to eat. Where are we going to eat? There's no food. God had to miraculously provide manna from heaven every day while they were in the wilderness to feed them. That's not the case in Canaan, though. This is fruitful land. It's already prepared for them. Okay, now let's look at something else, though. Go to verse number 27. What they find out is that God is faithful. I don't know if you've noticed, that's been a theme a lot here lately. Something I have been intentionally trying to include in just about every lesson I teach is the reminder to me and you that God is always faithful. Good times, bad times, dark times, times where we don't know the outcome, God is always faithful. He's always shown Himself to be faithful. He will always show Himself to be faithful. Now, if you drop yourself off in the middle of a story, you might look around and go, God doesn't look very faithful right now. If you drop yourself off in the middle of the Exodus, or right at the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus like we were this morning, Joseph, his whole family's down there, and he said, hey, God is faithful. He brought Joseph down here to preserve life. And he did. And so, yes, God is faithful. And then you turn a page and go, no, wait a minute. That Pharaoh's dead and a new one's on the throne. And now all of those people, they've multiplied and become this large nation, and they're all enslaved. And they're literally being worked to death. And they continue to grow, and so the Pharaoh, out of fear, begins to take their newborn male children and have them thrown into the river to die. And the children of Israel looked around and go, how faithful is the Lord now? And they cried out for deliverance. I didn't read this text this morning, but if you read the very last verse of Exodus chapter 2, it says that the Lord heard their cry, and He remembered His promise that He had made unto their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God visited His people, and God raises up Moses to be a deliverer. But now, if you jump right in the midst of that story and you look around, it's pretty dark in Egypt. I want to suggest something to you. If it is the case that you are questioning whether or not God will be faithful to keep the promises that He has made to His people, my plea for you is just to hang on. You might be in the middle of the story. You might be in the middle of the story. And in the middle of the story is usually when things are the worst, when things are the hardest, when things are the scariest, when things are the most uncertain. But if you track with all of these stories that we've been studying in the Bible, here's what you come to find out. When the story comes to an end, how does it always come to an end? Those that have remained faithful to the Lord get to enjoy the faithfulness of the Lord. Now, God has promised them what? That this land of Canaan that they've been hearing about for centuries. Remember what we said from the time that God first called Abraham out of Canaan, or out of Ur of the Chaldees, until they finally actually crossed over into the land of Canaan? It was nearly 1,000 years. And so generation after generation of Jewish child has been born into a family that is telling them stories about one day God is going to visit His people, and God is going to take us to this place called Canaan. And God said it's a land that flows with milk and honey. But you see, you've never seen it. Everything that you know about it is what you've heard, and you're having to walk by faith. You're having to trust that God will do it. And then finally, a generation comes. And verse 27 says, "The spies return. We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." Everything God said about Canaan was true. God has once again proven Himself to be faithful. This is a good story up to this point. But this is where the story winds up going into the ditch, because the people become fearful. Fear is a dangerous, dangerous thing. Fear will motivate people to do things they would not normally do. Just out of curiosity, has anybody in here ever hurt themselves trying to get away from something that you thought was going to hurt you? Maybe you look up and there's a wasp right here. Now, that lizard brain kicks in and it's fight or flight, right? And you're thinking to yourself, if I don't get away from this wasp, he's going to sting me. And it's going to hurt me really bad. And that scares me. So what do? You scream and you take off running, right? And you run right into the wall and knock yourself out and break your nose. Okay? Sometimes when we're afraid, we don't make good decisions. In fact, I would say that most of the time when we're afraid, we don't make good decisions. We make rash decisions. We make decisions that are based upon emotion. A lot of times we make bad decisions. These people come back. The land is fruitful. God has proven Himself once again to be faithful. And I'll remind you what these people have seen. These people who just spied out the land are the exact same people who used to have to make bricks with mud and not enough straw in them. That was a punishment that Pharaoh gave to them. The straw is what binds it together. Think about rebar and concrete. It's what helps it adhere to it. And he said, from now on, I'm not going to provide you straw. You got to go get that too. So not only do you have to take the mud and the straw and make the bricks, but now you got to go get your own ingredients. You got to go get the straw. He's making their lives harder and more difficult. History tells us that the average life expectancy for a Jewish male during the time of the Egyptian exile was somewhere around 27 years old. This generation remembers that. They were there. They saw the taskmasters with the whips. They heard the screams of not just the babies, but of the mothers as those infants were torn from their hands and thrown into the river. They have seen all of this. But you know what else they've seen? They've seen Moses lift a staff and say, "Be quiet." I know the King James says, "Be still," but what he's telling them is to zip it, because they were crying out, "We're going to die, we're going to die." And he says, "Be still and witness God's salvation." And they watch a sea part in front of them. And they walk right across it. And when Egyptian soldiers follow after them, they watch God close it back down on top of them. They watched God manifest Himself on top of Mount Sinai, where the ground shook like an earthquake, fire and smoke and lightning. They saw all of this. They've witnessed the manna every day. We go out, there it is. They've watched water come out and be turned from bitter to sweet with Moses throwing a bush in it. They've seen all of that. They know that the land is fruitful. They know that God is faithful, but they encounter something that scares them. And so they come back and they give this report. However, now what is the however? Look at the previous verse. We came to the land which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified. That means they had walls around them, and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Anakims were the descendants of giants. So when he says that we saw the sons of Anak there, he's saying, and some of the people who are there are giants. They're not just, soldiers with good cities. These are guys that we would think of almost as superhuman. Now I want you to realize what they've already had victory over. What was Egypt? Was Egypt a walled city? Was Egypt a strong group of people? Egypt was the dominant world empire at the time. Okay? This is the dominant world empire. And what did God do? God gave them complete victory over a superpower, and they didn't even so much as pick up a rock and throw it at them. Now they see these cities that are walled, soldiers, giants, and they were afraid. Now this is where the rubber starts to meet the road in the story. Pick up with me in verse number 30. God's people find themselves at a crossroad. A couple of guys say, this isn't the problem. Verse number 30. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are able to overcome it. Caleb sees what's going on. He sees fear. Caleb's been around long enough. He's got enough experience. He's got enough wisdom that he knows how quickly fear can become contagious and spread like a plague. And so he steps in pretty quick, and they say, there's walled cities, and there's giants, and the people are stirring us. And Caleb says, yeah, let's go right now and take it. Let's just go right now. Why? Why does he say let's go now? Because he knows if they have time to think about it, they'll have time to come up with excuses not to do it. You talk to anybody that's ever been maybe in law enforcement or that's ever been in the military, especially if they've had to be in any type of combat environment, they'll all tell you the same thing. Courage does not mean, bravery does not mean that you're not scared. It means you're scared, but you do it anyway. Because there's not anybody, how well trained, how well equipped, when you know you're going to go into hostile territory and the people on the other side are going to do everything in their power to try and kill you, you don't turn that part of your brain off and say, don't be scared. They all say the same thing. You just have to rely on your training. You're afraid, but you trust in your training, and you go on and do your job. See, Caleb understands this. By the way, Caleb is going to go on to become an incredible military leader. It's going to be a while before he gets a chance to flex his muscles, but he's going to become an incredible military leader, and you see the roots of that already right here. He immediately jumps in and says, let's go do it. We can overcome them. Let's go right now. But look at verse number 31. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. Two people, Joshua and Caleb, are voices saying we can do this. 10 voices begin to say, no, we can't. Who do you think wins? The 10 voices or the 2 voices? I want to suggest something to you. It's not about the 10 voices versus the 2 voices. It's the loudest voices. Look with me in verse number 32. So they brought to the people of Israel a report, a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. No, wait a minute. Whoa, wait a minute. I thought you said this was a fruitful land flowing with milk and honey. Grapes, pomegranates, figs. Now you see how the escalation is already taking place? And by the way, doesn't fear do that? Come on, I know some of you have been sitting at home at night by yourself, lights out, you're watching a scary movie, and you hear a noise. Now, your intellect says, It was probably a branch or something hit the house or an acorn fell off. But then that other part of your brain that's controlled by fear starts talking to you. No, it wasn't. It was not a branch. That was a serial killer. He has escaped from the Florida Department of Corrections, and he has made his way to your neighborhood, and he senses that you're here alone, and he's here, and you're in trouble. So your best bet, just get the shotgun out and just start firing in every direction right now. See how fear does it? We know fear tends to escalate. Okay? It goes from there's walled cities, there's strong soldiers, there are giants there, all of which is true, to this is a land that devours its inhabitants. Now let me stop and ask a question. Aren't there inhabitants there now? And what was the shape of the inhabitants of the land? Large population, walled cities, they got all this abundant fruit. Has the land devoured the people who are inhabiting it now? Now we've gone from, it's not just the people that are against us. It's not just the people we've got to fear. We've got to fear the very land itself. It's going to devour us before we even get to the people. And the people that we saw there are giants. Verse 33, there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers. That's how we seem to them. By the way, did you catch that? We seemed like grasshoppers to them in our own sight. This is how they see themselves. Chapter 14 continues, then all the congregation raised a loud cry. Now remember, it starts, we've got 10 voices who start and say, it's everything God said it would be. And here's the obstacles: walled cities, large armies, big soldiers. Now keep in mind, you've already defeated Pharaoh, his chariots, his mighty army, all of his gods, all of that without doing anything. And now it's escalated to the very land itself is going to consume us, not to mention the giants. We have no chance. Now we've got not 10 people, but the whole camp. The whole congregation is crying out, and the people wept that night. In a different story, in a different setting, those people would have gone to bed that night saying, Lord, thank you for your faithfulness in delivering all of your promises yet again. My great granddaddy was told that you were going to give him a land that flowed with milk and honey, and praise God, I get to be the one to inherit it. What a time to be alive. Lord, thank you for letting me be born when I was born, that I get to witness not just the Exodus, but the entrance into the promised land. That's how they should have gone to bed that night. But they cried themselves to sleep. And wake up, it's going to get worse. Verse 2, all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died. That means I wish that. I wish that we had died in the land of Egypt. Or I wish that we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our children will become prey. Would it not have been better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said one to another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Let me ask you a question. If they choose somebody else to lead them, what do you think is going to become of Moses and Aaron? You think they're just going to let those guys go? Whose fault is it? I'm talking about the group think. Hey, aren't you the one that brought us out here? No, this is all your fault. You did this to us. We were happy in Egypt. We were well fed in Egypt. We went to bed every night and laid right beside our wives and our children. Well, except for our sons, because they got thrown into the river. But we laid down with our families at night, and we slept under the beautiful stars in a great economy and in a stable situation. And you ruined all of that. Let me tell you something. Moses and Aaron are a step away from having a noose around their neck. Fear did all of this. Fear did all of this. 10 people. And now the whole nation has turned against it. Not even Moses and Joshua and Caleb. Now keep in mind who I just named off. Moses, Joshua, Caleb. Those are 3 of the greatest servants and leaders in the entire Bible. These are Hall of Famers, okay? These are the guys whose names get inscribed on buildings and get buildings named after them. And not even those 3 could overcome the power of pessimism when it was coming from so many negative voices. And that pessimism resulted in the loss of an entire generation. Verse number 5 says, Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, they tore their clothes and they said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out, it's an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give to us a land that flows with milk and honey. Do not rebel against the Lord. Do not fear the people of the land. They are bread for us. God will feed them to us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord said, He is with us. Do not fear them. Then all the congregation said, let's stone them with stones. Moses, Joshua, Caleb, Aaron, either you get in line or we're going to kill you. Boy, if they only had that fighting spirit for taking the land. Verse number 10 says, the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of the meeting to all the people of Israel. And He said, Moses, how long am I going to tolerate? Just to give you an idea of Moses' character, at this point, we're going to skip it for time's sake, but at this point Moses falls before God and he begs God not to destroy these people. He asks God, forgive them. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Sounds like somebody else I know that even when they were dying was saying, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Drop down with me to verse number 21. Let's see the outcome of all this. God says, truly as I live and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and you have put me to the test these 10 times and have not obeyed my voice, none of you shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers, and none of those who despise me shall see it. What a waste. What a waste. An entire generation is going to be wasted. What should have taken them 2 weeks at the most is going to take them 40 years to be able to enjoy. What a waste. But that's the power of pessimism, fear, and negativity that it can have. It can ruin anything that's good, and it can put a group of people, whether it's a ball team, a school, a church, a nation, whatever it is, it can put you in a holding pattern where you're just spinning your wheels for an entire generation. We can't get any traction to move forward. Why? Because the voice of negativity is so powerful and so loud that any sign of positivity that rises up, it's immediately squashed down with negativity. And the loudest voice wins. And I want you to understand something. Not even a great leader like Moses could stop it. And so we're at a crossroads too. Which voice will win at Lake City? The voice of faith or the voice of fear? Which is going to be more powerful? Pessimism or optimism? I'd suggest something to you. Just like it was in the days of Moses and the Israelites in the wilderness, it's going to be the voice that's the loudest. Not necessarily the voice that has the most people, but I will say this. Generally speaking, the more people you have, the louder the voice becomes. Especially if the people are speaking as one. We could take the path of the fearful. We can say, you know what? Attendance has declined over the last decade, however long you want to pick. Baptisms have slowed down. Our contribution is actually down. We need future leaders right now. Preaching is always too long here. By the way, everything I just said is true. Everything I said is true. It's not that this is... It wasn't the case that there weren't giants in the land. It wasn't the case that there weren't walled cities. It wasn't the case that there weren't strong armies. All that they said was true. Now, their fear led them to take something that was true and magnify it into something that wasn't. Everything I just said is true, and we shouldn't ignore these things. But neither should we let them intimidate us or discourage us or paralyze us or consume us. Because I want to point out that there is also a lot of fruit here as well. You stop to realize that at this congregation we have tons of trained educators. We were having a conversation the other day. The single greatest percentage of occupation at this church is teacher. Trained educators. College-equipped educators. You know how important it is to have good teachers? We know in every area of life the importance and value of education. We are loaded to the bare with educators here. That's fantastic. We've got a surplus of money. When we have problems that we encounter or opportunities that we face, I don't think since I have been here I've once heard the question come up, well, how in the world are we going to pay for that? Not a problem that we have. Not to say we don't have other problems, but that's not a problem that we have. We've got a squadron of healthy retirees. You know, a lot of times when people get to the age of retirement, that's it, they're done. They can't do much. That's not the case here. We've got a bunch of very healthy, active, vibrant retirees, which means they've got more time on their hands than they've ever had in their lives before. And they're wiser than they've ever been before because they got a lot of experience behind them. They've seen what works and what doesn't work. We've got over two dozen youth that are currently in training. If nothing else from this sermon shows you how fruitful things are here right now, that tonight should show you. That tonight should remind you. I joked with Ralston about taking my job. He didn't say that, but I picked at him. That's the plan. That's the plan. To raise up our own replacements, whether it's in the pulpit or the Sunday school class or the eldership or whatever the case may be. That's the plan. We raise our own replacements. And we're doing that. We've got an army of leading ladies here in our life group that does more good than I could possibly talk about tonight. We've got great facilities. In fact, our facilities are so good that a lot of times people in the community use our facilities. They come and have their events and their gatherings and their functions and things here at our buildings because we've got such great facilities. We've got multiple talents. We've got people with all sorts of training and skills and education and background. We've got all of those things here. This is a fruitful place and a fruitful time. It's not to say that the other stuff isn't true. It is true. But what is also true? Just set aside God. And I'm going to pick him back up in a minute, so don't worry. But set aside God. Just based on what I said about the fruits that we have at this congregation, we already are equipped with what we need to overcome the obstacles that I mentioned. Now, add to that the fact that God is faithful. Add to that the fact that God says that He'll work in us and through us. Add to that the fact that God says that He will bless us. Add to that the fact that God says, when you bear fruit, I will prune you so that you can bear much fruit. Add to all of those things. God is faithful and we can be too. We need to continue to trust and obey. If a problem exists, we address it. If what we do doesn't work, we try something else. And then we trust that God will give us victory over any obstacle that we encounter. Now here's the question I want to ask as we close, and I want to leave you with. Which voice is going to be the loudest here? What voice are you going to be shouting at the top of your lungs? Because the loudest voice is going to win. Be careful. All that stuff I said about the fruit, while it's true, if the loudest voices are the voices of fear and pessimism, we will squander an entire generation. Be wasted. Be wasted. We'll look back, if we're still around 30 years from now, at a lost generation. There'll be a great big hole in this congregation. A lot of congregations are already seeing that. And they realize we've lost generations in the past. Maybe we have. I haven't been here long enough to be able to answer that question. Maybe we've lost generations in the past. And if that is the case, we can't afford to lose another one. Which voice is going to be the loudest here? To use the math of this book, to use the numbers of numbers, if you will, it'll take 5 voices of faith to dilute every voice of pessimism and fear. There were 2 voices that were positive, there were 10 that were negative, and the 10 won. So I'm going to go on a 5-to-1 ratio. For every negative person we have here, we've got to have 5 positive in order to dilute the power of that voice. For every one fearful person who is pessimistic, we're going to need 5 more people to dilute the power and influence of that fear and pessimism. What I'm asking and challenging and calling on you to do right now is what Joshua is going to do 40 years later when he's standing in the same place. Choose this day whom you will serve. I'm asking you to make a decision tonight as we roll forward into a new year. And we're going to carry some of those problems with us into the new year. We're also going to carry all of those fruits. Choose what voice is going to come out of your mouth. Is it going to be one that is critical and negative and fearful and pessimistic? Or is it going to be one that says, let's go do it right now. Let's go do it. The Lord will give us the victory that He's promised. Maybe tonight you want to join the voice of God's people by first joining in the Lord's army. If you believe that Jesus Christ came and lived on this earth and died in our place so that He could prepare a place for us and call us to follow in His footsteps, if you believe the truthfulness of that story and you're ready to become a part of that story, then tonight tell these people. And by the way, it's not just going to be one lonely voice. Everybody in here that I know that is already a believer would gladly say with you, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. All our voices will unite together. And then you can put on Jesus in baptism. If we can help you do that, we're fixing to join our voices together again. We're going to join our voices together in song to encourage you to make the choice to give yourself fully to the Lord. If we can help you, come while we stand and sing this song.